ASMRtist, at least for now. Thank you for joining me in another reading video. We are reading the Scarlet Letter. We are on chapter 14. As usual, we will start with setting our intention and clearing our space. I've added a new salt crystal lamp as well. We've started a new incense pack. I've got a incense coffin, so super excited about those things. So yes, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. If you can, please sit back and relax, and just let your mind escape for a little while into this story. Alright, so let's get into it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is start by moving the book out of the way. Alright, and we'll start with lighting our candles, setting our intention. Take the claws off as well for safety. Okay, so I set the intention that tonight's reading accomplish the greatest and highest good for all. Okay, now we will go to our water cleanse. Okay, so let's just go ahead and take a few deep breaths in with me, and breathe in the lavender essential oil cleansing spray. Very good. Okay, now just if you can, close your eyes and start to meditate and relax. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and do our smoke cleanse. I'm so sorry if you can hear some background noise, but my husband is working in the other room. There we go. Look at all that smoke. It's so beautiful. Alright, let's just cleanse with the 7 chakra incense to help align our chakras while we read the story. And relax. So you're getting a little bit of Reiki while we read the story, right? Okay. Okay, Hester and the Physician, chapter 14. Hester bade little Pearls run down to the margin of the water and play with the shells and tangle the seaweed until she should have talked a while with yonder gardener of herbs. So the child flew away like a bird, and making bare her small white feet, went pattering along the moist margin of the sea. Here and there also came to a full stop, and peeped curiously into a pool left by the retiring tide as a mirror for Pearl to see her face in. For the pup peeped at her out of the pool with dark glistening curls around her head and an elf smile in her eyes, the image of a little maid, whom Pearl, having no other playmate, invited to take her hand and run a race with her. But the visionary little maid on her part beckoned likewise, as if to say, "This is a better place, come thou into the pool." And Pearl, stepping in mid-leg deep, beheld her own white feet at the bottom, while out of a still lower path came the gleam of a kind of fragmentary smile, floating to and fro in the agitated water. Meanwhile her mother had accosted the physician. "I would speak a word with you," said she, "a word that concerns us much." Said, and is it Mistress Hester that has a word for old Roger Chillingworth?" Answered he, raising himself from his stooping posture. "With all my heart. Why, mistress, I hear good things of you on all hands." Those finger claws are really cumbersome. Okay, when I'm trying to do this. "No longer than a yester-eve, a magistrate, a wise and godly man, was discoursing of your affairs, Mistress Hester, and whispered me that there had been question concerning you in the council. It was debated whether or no, with safety to the commonweal, yonder scarlet letter might be taken off your bosom. On my life, Hester, I made my entreaty to the worshipful magistrate that it might be done forthwith. It lies not in the pleasure of the magistrates to take off this badge," calmly replied Hester. Were they to be quit of it, would fall away of its own nature, or be transformed into something that should speak a different purpose. "Nay, then, wear it, if it suits you better," rejoined he. "A woman must needs follow her own fancy touching the adornment of her person. The letter is gaily embroidered, and shows right bravely on your bosom." All this while Hester had been looking steadily at the old man, and was shocked as well as wonder-smitten to discern what a change had been wrought upon him within the past 7 years. It was not so much that he had grown older, for though the traces of advancing life were visible, he wore his age well and seemed to retain a wiry vigor and alertness. But the former aspect of an intellectual and studious man, calm and quiet, which was what she best remembered in him, had altogether vanished and been succeeded by an eager, searching, almost fierce, yet careful kept on smoldering duskily within his breast, until, by some casual puff of passion, it was blown into a momentary flame. This he repressed as speedily as possible, and strove to look as if nothing of the kind had happened. In a word, old Roger Chillingworth was a striking evidence of man's faculty of transforming himself into a devil, if he will only for a reasonable space of time undertake a devil's office. This unhappy person had effected such a transformation by devoting himself for 7 years to the constant analysis of a heart full of torture, and deriving his enjoyment thence, and adding fuel to those fiery tortures which he analyzed and gloated over. The Scarlet Letter burned on Esther Prynne's bosom. Here was another ruin, the responsibility of which came partly home to her. "What see you in my face?" asked the physician, "that you look at it so earnestly?" "Something that would make me weep, if there were any tears bitter enough for it," answered she, "but let it pass. It is of yonder miserable man that I would speak." "And what of him?" cried Roger Chillingworth, eagerly, as if he loved the topic, and were glad of an opportunity to discuss it with the only person of whom he could make a confidant. "Not to hide the truth, Mistress Esther, my thoughts happened just now to be busy with the gentleman, so speak freely, and I will make answer." "When we last spake together," said Esther, "now 7 years ago, it was your pleasure to extort a promise of secrecy as touching the former relation betwixt yourself and me. As the life and good fame of yonder man were in your hands, there seemed to be no choice to me save to be silent in accordance with your behest. Yet it was not without heavy misgivings that I thus bound myself, for having cast off all duty towards other human beings, there remained a duty towards him, and something whispered to me that I was betraying it in pledging myself to keep your counsel. Since that day no man is so near to him as you. You tread behind his every footstep. You are beside him, a burrow and rankle in his heart. Your clutch is on his life, and you cause him to die daily a living death. And still he knows you not. In permitting this, I have surely acted a false part by the only man to whom the power was left me to be true. What choice had you?" asked Roger Chillingworth. My finger pointed at this man would have hurled him from his pulpit into a dungeon, thence peradventure to the gallows. "It had been better so," said Esther Prynne. "What evil have I done?" the man asked Roger Chillingworth. "I tell thee, Esther Prynne, the richest fee that ever physician earned from monarch could not have bought such care as I have wasted on this miserable priest. But for my aid, his life would have burned away in torments within the first 2 years after the perpetration of his crime, and thine. For, Esther, his spirit lacked the strength that could have been borne up as thine beneath a burden like thy Scarlet Letter. Oh, I could reveal a godly secret, but enough. What art can do, I have exhausted on him. That he now breathes and creeps about on earth is owing all to me." "Better he had died at once," said Esther Prynne. "Yes, a woman, thou sayest truly." "Yes, thou woman sayest truly," cried old Roger Chillingworth, letting the lurid fire of his heart blaze out before her eyes. "Better that he died at once. Never did mortal suffer what this man has suffered, and been conscious. Never did mortal suffer what this man has suffered, and all in the sight of his worst enemy." "He has been conscious of me. He has felt an influence dwelling always upon him like a curse. He knew by some spiritual sense, for the Creator never made another being so sensitive as this. He knew that no friendly hand pulling at his heart. He knew that no friendly hand was pulling at his heartstrings, and that an eye was looking curiously into him, which sought only evil, and found it. But he knew not that the eye and hand were mine. With the superstition common to his brotherhood, he fancied himself given over to a fiend to be tortured with frightful dreams and desperate thoughts, the sting of remorse and despair of pardon, as a foretaste of what awaits him beyond the grave. But it was the constant shadow of my presence, the closest propinquity of the man whom he had noticing the old man's look. Has he not paid? Has he not paid thee all? No, no, he has but increased the debt, answered the physician, and as he proceeded, his manner lost its fiercer characteristics and subsided into gloom. Dost thou remember me, Hester, as I was 9 years ago? Even then I was in the autumn of my days, nor was it the early autumn, but all my life had been made up of earnest, studious, thoughtful, quiet years, bestowed faithfully for the increase of mine own knowledge, and faithfully too, though this latter object was but casual to the other, faithfully for the advancement of human welfare. No life had been more peaceful and innocent than mine, few lives so rich with benefits conferred. Dost thou remember me? Was I not, though you might deem me cold, nevertheless a man, thoughtful for others, craving a little for himself, kind, true, just, and of constant, if not warm affections? Was I not all this? All this and more, said Hester, and what am I now? Demanded he, looking into her face and permitting the whole evil within him to be written on his features. I have already told thee what I am, a fiend, who made me so. It was myself, cried Hester, shuddering. It was I, not less than he. Why hast thou avenged thyself on me? Why hast thou not avenged thyself on me? I have left thee to the Scarlet Letter, replied Roger Chillingworth. If that have not avenged me, I can do no more. He laid his finger on it with a smile. It has avenged thee, answered Mr. Brent. I judged no less, said the physician. And now what wouldst thou with me touching this man? I must reveal the secret, answered Hester firmly. He must discern thee in thy true character. What may be the result I know not, but this long debt of confidence due from me to him, whose bane and ruin I have been, shall at length be paid, so far as concerns the overthrow or preservation of his fair fame and his earthly state, and perchance his life he is in thy hands. Nor do I, whom the Scarlet Letter has disciplined to truth, though it be the truth of red-hot iron entering into the soul, nor do I perceive such advantage in the living age any longer of life of ghastly emptiness, that I shall stoop to implore thy mercy. Do with him as thou wilt. There is no good for him, no good for me, no good for thee. There is no good for little Pearl. There's no path to guide us out of this dismal maze. Woman, I could well nigh pity thee, said Roger Chillingworth, unable to restrain a thrill of admiration too, for there was a quality almost majestic in the despair which she expressed. Thou hast great elements, peradventure hast thou met earlier with a better love than mine. This evil had not been. I pity thee for the good that has been wasted in thy nature. And I thee, answered Hester Prynne, for the hatred that has transformed a wise and just man to a fiend. Wilt thou yet purge it out of thee and become more human? If not for this sake, then doubly for thine own, forgive and leave his further retribution to the power that claims it. I said but now that there could be no good event for them or thee or me, who are here wandering together in this gloomy maze of evil and stumbling at every step over the guilt wherewith we have strewn our path. It is not so. There might be good for thee and thee alone, since thou hast been deeply wronged and hast it at thy will to pardon. Wilt thou give up that only privilege? Wilt thou reject that priceless benefit? Peace, Hester, peace, replied the old man with a gloomy sternness. It is not granted to pardon. I have no such power as thou tellest me of. My old faith, long forgotten, comes back to me and explains all that we do and all we suffer. By thy first step aright thou didst plant the germ of evil, but since that moment it has all been a dark necessity. Ye that have wronged me are not sinful, save in a kind of typical illusion. Neither am I fiend-like, who have snatched a fiend's office from his hands. It is our fate. Let the back flow our bosom as it may. Now go thy ways and deal as thou wilt with yonder man. He waved his hand and betook himself again to his employment Hester Prynne and went scooping away along the earth. He gathered here and there an herb or grubbed up a root and put it into the basket on his arm. His gray beard almost touched the ground as he crept onward. Hester gazed after him a little while, looking with a half-fantastic curiosity to see whether the tender grass of early spring would not be blighted beneath him and show the wavering track of his footsteps, sere and brown across its cheerful verdure. She wondered what sort of herbs they were, which the old man was so sedulous to gather. Would not the earth, quickened to an evil purpose by the sympathy of his eye, greet him with poisonous drops of species hitherto unknown that would start up under his fingers? Or might it suffice him that every wholesome growth should be converted into something deleterious and malignant at his touch? Did the sun, which shone so brightly everywhere else, really fall upon him, or was there, as it rather seemed, a circle of ominous shadow moving himself along his deformity, whichever way he turned himself? And whither was he now going? Would he not suddenly sink into the earth, leaving a barren and blasted spot, where, in due course of time, would be seen deadly? A deadly nightshade dogwood. And pain and whatever else of vegetable wickedness that climate could produce. All flourishing with hideous luxuriance, or would he spread bat's wings and fly away, looking so much the uglier the higher he rose towards heaven? Be it sin or no, said Hester Prynne, bitterly, as she still gazed after him. I hate the man. She upbraided herself for the sentiment, but could not overcome or lessen it. Attempting to do so, she thought of those long past days in a distant land, when he used to emerge at eventide from the seclusion, when he used to emerge at eventide from the seclusion of his study and sit down in the firelight of their home, and in the light of their nuptial smile. He needed to bask himself in that smile, he said, in order that the chill of so many lonely hours among his books might have taken off the scholar's heart. Such scenes had once appeared, not otherwise than happy, but now so viewed through the dismal medium of her subsequent life, they classed themselves among her ugliest remembrance. She marveled how such scenes could have been. She marveled how she could ever have been wrought upon to Miriam. She deemed it her crime most to be repented of that she had ever endured and reciprocated the lukewarm grasp of his hand, and had suffered the smile of her lips and eyes to mingle and melt into his own. And it seemed a fouler offense committed by Roger Chillingworth than any which had been since done to him, that in the time with her heart knew no better, he had persuaded her to fancy herself happy by his side. Yes, I hate him, repeated Hester more bitterly than before. He betrayed me. He has done the worse wrong than I did. He has done me worse wrong than I did him. Let men tremble to win the hand of woman, unless they win along with the utmost passion of her heart. Else it may be their miserable fortune, as it was Roger Chillingworth's, when some mightier touch than their own have awakened all our sensibilities to be reproached even for the calm content, the marble image of happiness, which they will have imposed upon her as the warm reality. But Hester ought long ago to have done with this injustice. What did it betoken? Had 7 long years under the torture of the Scarlet Letter inflicted so much misery and wrought out no repentance? The emotions of that brief space. She stood gazing after the crooked figure of old Roger Chillingworth, threw a dark light on Hester's state of mind, revealing much that she might not otherwise have acknowledged to herself. He being gone, she summoned back her child. Pearl, little Pearl, where are you? Pearl, whose activity of spirit never flagged, had been at no loss for amusement, while her mother talked with the old gardener of herbs. At first, as already told, child, she had flirted fancifully with her own image in a pool of water, beckoning the phantom forth, and as it declined to venture, seeking a passage for herself into its sphere of impalpable earth and unattainable sky. Soon finding, however, that either she or the image was unreal, she turned elsewhere for better pastime. She made little boats out of birch bark and foresighted them with snail shells, and sent out more ventures on the mighty deep than any merchant in New England. But the larger part of them foundered near the shore. She seized a live horseshoe by the tail, and made prize of several 5 fingers, and laid out a jellyfish to melt in the warm sun. Then she took up the white foam that streaked the line of the advancing tide, and threw upon it the breeze, scampering after it with winged footsteps to catch the great snowflakes ere they fell. Perceiving a flock of beach birds that fed and fluttered along to the shore, the naughty child picked up her apron full of pebbles, and creeping from rock to rock after these small seafowl, displayed remarkable dexterity in pelting them. One little gray bird with a white breast, Pearl was almost sure had been hit by a pebble and fluttered away with a broken wing. But then the elf child sighed and gave up her sport, because it grieved her to have done harm to a little being that was as wild as a sea breeze, or as wild as Pearl herself. Her final employment was to gather seaweed of various kinds and make herself a scarf, a mantle, and a headdress, and thus assumed the aspect of a little mermaid. She inherited her mother's gift for devising drapery and costume. As the last touch to her mermaid's garb, Pearl took some eelgrass and imitated, as best as she could, on her own bosom the decoration with which she was so familiar on her mother's, the letter A, but freshly green instead of scarlet. The child bent her chin upon her breast and contemplated this device with strange interest, even as if the one only thing for which she had been sent into the world was to make out its hidden import. I wonder if Mother will ask me what it means, thought Pearl. Just then she heard her mother's voice, and flitting along as highly as one of the little seabirds appeared before Esther Prynne, dancing, laughing, and pointing her finger to the ornament on her bosom. "My little Pearl," said Esther, after a moment's silence, the green letter and on thy childish bosom has no purport. But dost thou know, my child, what this letter means, which thy mother is doomed to wear? "Yes, mother," said the child, "it is the great letter A. Thou hast taught me in the horn book." Esther looked steadily into her little face, but though there was that singular expression which she had so often remarked in her black eyes, she could not satisfy herself whether Pearl really attached any meaning to the symbol. She felt a morbid desire to ascertain the point. "Dost thou know, child, wherefore thy mother wears this letter?" "Truly do I," answered Pearl, looking brightly into her mother's face. "It is for the same reason that the minister keeps his hand over his heart." "And what reason is that?" said Esther, half smiling at the absurd incongruity of the child's observation, but on second thoughts turning pale. "What has the letter to do with any heart to save mine?" "Nay, mother, I have told all I know," said Pearl more seriously than she was wont to speak. "As yonder old man whom thou hast been talking with, it may be he can tell, but in good earnest now, mother dear, what does this scarlet letter mean? And why dost thou wear it on thy bosom? And why does the minister keep his hand over his heart?" She took her mother's hand in both her own, and gazed into her eyes with an earnestness that was seldom seen in her wild and capricious character. The thought occurred to Esther that the child might really be seeking to approach her with childlike confidence, and doing what she could, and as intelligently as she knew how, to establish a meeting point of sympathy. It showed Pearl in an unwanted aspect. Heretofore the mother, while loving her child with the intensity of a soul affection, had schooled herself to hope for little other return than the waywardness of an April breeze. spends its time in airy sport and has its guest of inexplicable passion and is petulant in its best of moods. Chills oftener than caresses you when you take it into your bosom, in requital of which misdemeanors it will sometimes, of its own vague purpose, kiss your cheek with a kind of doubtful tenderness, and play gently with your hair, and then be gone about its other idle business, having leaving a dreamy pleasure at your heart. And this, moreover, was a mother's estimate of the child's disposition. Any other observer might have seen few unamiable traits, and have given them a far darker coloring. But now the idea came strongly into Esther's mind that Pearl with her remarkable precocity and acuteness might already have approached the age when she could be made a friend and interested with as much of her mother's sorrows as could be imparted, without irreverence either to the parent or the child. In the little chaos of Pearl's character there might be seen emerging, and could I have been from the very first, the steadfast principles of an unflinching courage. The steadfast principles of an unflinching courage and an uncontrollable will, a sturdy pride which might be disciplined into self-respect, and a bitter scorn of many things which, when examined, might be found to have the taint of falsehood in them. She possessed affections too, though hitherto acrid and disagreeable as are the rich flavors of unripe fruit. With all these sterling attributes, thought Esther, the evil which she inherited from her mother must be great indeed, if a noble woman do not grow out of this elfish time. Pearl's inevitable tendency to hover about the enigma of the Scarlet Letter seemed an innate quality of her being. From the earliest epoch of her conscious life, she had just entered upon this as her appointed mission. Esther had often fancied that Providence had a design of justice and retribution in endowing the child with this marked propensity, but never until now had she bethought herself to ask whether linked with that design there might not likewise be a purpose of mercy and beneficence. If little Pearl were entertained with faith and trust as a spirit messenger no less than an earthly child, might it not be her errand to soothe away the sorrow that lay cold in her mother's heart, and converted it into a tomb, and to help her to overcome the passion once so wild and even yet neither dead nor asleep, but only imprisoned within the same tomb-like heart? Such were some of the thoughts that now stirred in Esther's mind, and with as much vivacity of impression as if they had actually whispered into her ear. And there was little Pearl all this while holding her mother's hand in both her own and turning her face upward while she put these searching questions once and again, and still a third time. What does the letter mean, mother, and why dost thou wear it, and why does the minister keep his hand over his heart? What shall I say, thought Esther to herself? No, if this be the price of the child's sympathy, I cannot pay it. Then she spoke aloud. Silly Pearl, said she, what questions are these? There are many things in this world that a child must not ask about. What know I of the minister's heart? And as for the Scarlet Letter, I wear it for the sake of its gold thread. In all the 7 bygone years, Esther Prynne had never before been false to the symbol of her bosom. It may be that it was the talisman of a stern and severe but yet a guardian spirit who foretook her as recognizing that, in spite of the strict watch over her heart, some new evil had crept into it, or some old one had never been expelled. As for little Pearl, the earnestness soon passed out of her face, but the child did not see fit to let the matter drop 2 or 3 times as her mother and she went homeward, and as often at supper time, and while Esther was putting her to bed, and once after she seemed to be fairly asleep, Pearl looked up with a mischief gleaming in the said she, what does the Scarlet Letter mean? And the next morning, the first indication the child gave of being awake was by popping her head from the pillow and making the other inquiry, which she had so unaccountably connected with her investigations along about the Scarlet Letter. Mother, mother, why does the minister keep his hand over his heart? Hold thy tongue, naughty child, answered her mother, with an asperity that she had never permitted to herself before. Do not tease me, else I shall shut thee into the dark closet. Chapter 16. A Forest Walk. Hester Prynne remained constant in her resolve to make known to Mr. Dimmesdale at whatever risk of present pain or ulterior consequences the true character of the man who had crept into his intimacy for several days. However, she vainly sought an opportunity of addressing him in some of the meditative walks which she knew about him to be in the habit of talking along the shores of the peninsula or on the wooded hills of the neighboring country. There would have been no scandal, indeed, no peril to the holy whiteness of the clergyman's good fame, had she visited him in his own study, where many penitent ere now had confessed of perhaps as deep a dye as the one betokened by the Scarlet Letter. But partly that she dreaded the secret or undisguised interference of old Roger Chillingworth, and partly that her conscious heart imputed suspicion where none could have been felt, and partly that both the minister and she would need the whole wide world to breathe in while they talked together. For all these reasons, Hester never thought of meeting him in any narrower privacy than beneath the open sky, at least while attending in a sick chamber whither the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale had been summoned to make a prayer. She learned that he had gone the day before to visit the Apostle Eliot among his native converts. He would probably return by a certain hour in the afternoon or the morrow betimes. Therefore, the next day, Hester took little Pearl, who was necessarily the companion of all her mother's expeditions, however inconvenient her presence, and set forth. The road after the two wayfarers had crossed from the peninsula to the mainland was no other than a footpath. It straggled onward into the mystery of the primeval forest. This hemmed it in so narrowly and stood so black and dense on either side, and disclosed such imperfect glimpses of the sky above, that to Hester's mind it imaged not amiss the moral wilderness in which she had so long been wandering. The day was chill and somber. Overhead was a gray pause of cloud, slightly stirred, however, by a breeze, so that the gleam of flickering sunshine might now and then be seen as its solitary play along the path. This flitting cheerfulness was always at the farther extremity of some long vista through the forest. The sportive sunlight, feebly sportive at best in the predominant pensiveness of the day and scene, withdrew itself as they came nigh and left the spots where it had danced the drearier because they had hoped to find them bright. Mother, said little Pearl, the sunshine does not love you. It runs away and hides itself because it is afraid of something on your bosom. Now see, there it is, playing a good way off. Stand you here, and let me run to it, and let me run and catch it. I am but a child, it will not flee from me, for I wear nothing on my bosom yet. Nor ever will, child, I hope, said Hester. And why not, mother, said Pearl, stopping short just as the beginning of a race. Will not it come of its own accord when I am a woman grown? Run away, child, answered her mother, and catch the sunshine, it will soon be gone. Pearl set forth at a great pace, and as Hester "It will go now," said Pearl, shaking her head. "See," answered Esther, smiling. "Now I can stretch out my hand and grasp some of it." As she attempted to do so, the sunshine vanished, or to judge from the bright expression that was dancing on Pearl's features, her mother could have fancied that the child had absorbed it into herself and would give it forth again with a gleam about her path, as they should plunge into some gloomier shade. There was no other attribute that so much impressed her with the sense of new and untransmitted vigor in Pearl's nature as this never-failing vivacity of spirits. She had not the disease of sadness, which almost all children in these latter days inherit with the scrofula from the troubles of their ancestors. Ancestral trauma, I guess, is what they're referring to. Perhaps this too was a disease, and but the reflex of the wild energy with which Esther had fought against her sorrows before Pearl's birth. It was certainly a doubtful charm, imparting a hard, metallic luster to the child's character. She wanted what some people want throughout life, a grief that should deeply touch her, and thus humanize and make her capable of sympathy. But there was time enough yet for little Pearl. "Come, my child," said Esther, looking about her from the spot where Pearl had stood still in the sunshine. "We will sit down a little way within the wood and rest ourselves. I am not weary, mother," replied the little girl. "But you may sit down if you will tell me a story meanwhile." "A story, child," said Esther, "and about what?" "Oh, a story about the black man," answered Pearl, taking hold of her mother's gown and looking up at her mischievously into her face. "How he haunts this forest and carries a book with him, a big heavy book with iron clasps, and how this ugly black man offers his book and an iron pen to everybody that meets him here among the trees, and they are to write their names with their own blood, and then he sets his mark on their bosoms. Didst thou ever meet the black man, mother?" "I have told you the story, Pearl," asked her mother, recognizing a common superstition of the period. "It was the old dame in the chimney corner at the house where you watched last night," said the child, "but she fancied me asleep while she was talking of it. She said that 1,000 people had met him here and had written in his book and had his mark on them, and that ugly tempered lady, old Mistress Evans, was one. And mother, the old dame said that the Scarlet Letter was the black man's mark on thee, and that it glows like a red flame when thou meetst him at midnight here in the dark wood. Is it true, mother? And dost thou go to meet him in the night time?" Didst thou ever awake and find thy mother gone?" said Esther. "Not that I remember," said the child. "If thou fearest to leave me in our cottage, thou mightest take me along with thee. I would very gladly go. But mother, tell me now, is there such a black man, and didst thou ever meet him, and is this his mark?" "Wilt thou let me be at peace if I once tell thee?" asked her mother. "Yes, if thou tellest me all," answered Pearl. "Once in my life I met the black man," said her mother. "This Scarlet Letter is his mark." Thus conversing, they entered sufficiently deep into the wood to secure themselves from the observation of any casual passenger along the forest track. Here they sat down. They sat on a luxuriant heap of moss, which at some epoch of the preceding century had been a gigantic pine with its roots and trunk in the darkness of shade, and its head aloft in the upper atmosphere. It was a little dell where they had seated themselves, with a leaf-strewn bank rising gently on either side, and a brook flowing through the midst over a bed of fallen and drowned leaves. The trees bending over it had flung down great branches from time to time, which choked up the current and compelled it to form eddies and black depths at some points, while in its way of pebbles and brown sparkling sand. Letting the eyes follow along the course of the stream, they could catch the reflected light from its water at some short distance within the forest, but soon lost all traces of it amid the bewilderment of tree trunks and underbrush, and here and there a huge rock covered in fern. Covered over with gray lichens, all these giant trees and boulders of granite seemed intent on making the was spending its infancy without playfulness, and knew how to be, and knew how to be merry. Among sad acquaintances and events of somber hue. Oh, Brook, oh, foolish and tiresome little Brook, cried Pearl, after listening a while to its talk. Why art thou so sad? Pluck up a spirit, and do not be all the time sighing and murmuring. But the Brook, in the course of its little lifetime of months among the forest trees, had gone through so solemn an experience that it could not help talking about it, and seemed to have nothing else to say. Pearl resembled the Brook inasmuch as the current of her life gushed from the wellspring as mysterious and had flowed through scenes shadowed as heavily with gloom. But unlike the little stream, she danced and sparkled and rattled airily along her course. What does this sad little Brook say, mother? Inquired she. If thou hast a sorrow of thine own, the Brook might tell thee of it, answered the mother, even as it is telling me of mine. But now, Pearl, I hear a footstep along the path, and the noise of one putting aside the branches. I would have thee betake thyself to play, and leave me to speak with him that comes yonder. Is it the black man? Asked Pearl. Wilt thou come and play, child? Repeated her mother. But do not stray far into the wood, and take heed that thou come at my first call. Yes, mother, answered Pearl, but if it be the black man, wilt thou not let me stay a moment and look at him with his big book under his arm? Go, silly child, said her mother impatiently. It is no black man. Thou canst see him now through the trees. It is the minister. And so it is, said the child. And, mother, he has his hand over his heart. Is it because when the minister wrote his name in the book, the black man set his mark in that place? But why does he not wear it outside his bosom? And as thou dost, mother. Go now, child, and thou shalt tease me as thou wilt another time, cried Esther Brand. But do not stray far. Keep where thou canst hear the babble of the brook. The child went singing away, following up the current of the brook, and striving to mingle a more light, semi cadence with its melancholy voice. But the little stream would not be comforted, and still kept telling the unintelligible secret of some very mournful mystery that had happened, or making a prophetic lamentation about something that was yet to happen within the verge of the dismal forest. So Pearl, had enough of shadowed in her own life, chose to break up all acquaintance with this repining brook. She set herself therefore to gather violets and wood anemones and some scarlet columbines that she found growing in the crevices of a high rock. When her elf child had departed, Esther Brand made a step or two towards the track that had led through. The forest still remained under the deep shadow of the trees. She beheld the minister advancing along the path, entirely alone and leaning on a staff which he had cut by the wayside. He looked haggard and feeble, and betrayed a nevertheless despondency in his air, which had never so remarkably characterized him in its walks about the settlement, nor in any other situation where he deemed himself liable to notice. Here it was woefully visible in the intense seclusion of the forest, which of itself would have been a heavy trial to the spirits. There was a listlessness in his gait, as if he saw no reason for taking one step farther, nor felt any desire to do so, but would have been glad, could he be glad of anything, to fling himself down at the root of the nearest tree, and lie there passive for evermore. The leaves might 17. The pastor and his parishioner. Slowly as the minister walked, he had almost gone by before Esther Prynne could gather voice enough to attract his observation. At length she succeeded. Arthur Dimmesdale, she said faintly at first, then louder but hoarsely. Arthur Dimmesdale, who speaks, answered the minister. Gathering himself quickly up, he stood more erect, like a man taken by surprise in a mood to which he was reluctant to have witnessed, throwing his eyes anxiously in the direction of the voice. He indistinctly beheld a form under the trees, clad in garments so somber and so little relieved from the grey twilight into which the clouded sky and the heavy foliage had darkened the noontide, that he knew not whether it were a woman or a shadow. It may be that his pathway through life was haunted thus by a spectre that had stolen out from among his thoughts. He made a step nigher and discovered the Scarlet Letter. Esther Prynne, said he, art thou in life? Even so, she answered, in such life as has been mine these 7 years past. And thou, Arthur Dimmesdale, dost thou yet live? It was no wonder that they thus questioned one another's actual and bodily existence, and even doubted. Of their own. So strangely did they meet in the dim wood, that it was like their first encounter in the world beyond the grave of two spirits who had been intimately connected in their former life, but now stood coldly shuddering in mutual dread, as not yet familiar with their state, nor wanted to the companionship of disembodied beings. Each a ghost and awe-stricken at the other ghost, they were awe-stricken likewise at themselves, because the crisis flung back to them their consciousness and revealed to each heart its history and experience as life never does, except at such breathless epochs. The soul beheld its features in the mirror of the passing moment. It was with fear and tremulously, and as it were by a slow, reluctant necessity, Arthur Dimmesdale put forth his hand, chill as death, and touched the chill hand of Esther Prynne. The grasp, cold as it was, took away what was dreariest in the interview. They now felt themselves at least inhabitants of the same sphere. Without a word spoken, neither he nor she assuming the guidance, but with an unexpressed consent. They glided back into the shadow of the woods whence Esther had emerged, and sat down on the heap of moss where she and Burhope had been before sitting. When they found voice to speak, it was at first only to utter remarks and inquiries, such as any two acquaintance might have made about the gloomy sky, the threatening storm, and next the health of each other. Thus they went onward, not boldly, but step by step, into the themes that were brooding deepest in their hearts. So long estranged by fate and circumstances, they needed something slight and casual to run before and throw open the doors of intercourse, so that their real thoughts might be led across the threshold. After a while, the minister fixed his eyes on Esther Prynne. Esther, said he, hast thou found peace? She smiled drearily, looking down upon her bosom. Hast thou? She asked. None, nothing but despair, he answered. What else could I look for, being what I am, and leading such a life as mine? Were I an atheist, a man devoid of conscience, a wretch with coarse and brutal instincts, I might have found peace long ere now. Nay, I never should have lost it, but as matters stand with my soul, whatever of good capacity there originally was in me, all of God's gifts that were the choicest have become the ministers of spiritual torment. Esther, I am said Esther, and surely thou workest good among them. Doth this bring thee no comfort? More misery, Esther, only the more misery, answered the clergyman with a bitter smile. As concerns the good which I may appear to do, I have no faith in it. It must needs be a delusion. What can a ruined soul like mine effect towards the redemption of other souls, or a polluted soul towards their purification? And as for the people's reverence, would that it were turned to scorn and hatred. Canst thou deem it, Esther, a consolation that I must stand up in my pulpit and meet so many eyes turned upward to my face, as if the light of heaven were beaming from it? Must see my flock hungry for truth and listening to my words as if a tongue of Pentecost were speaking, and then look inward and discern the black reality of what they idolize. I have laughed in bitterness and agony of heart at the contrast. At the contrast between what I seem and what I am, and Satan laughs at it. You wrong yourself in this, said Esther gently. You have deeply and sorely repented. Your sin is left behind you in the days long past. Your present life is not less holy in very truth than it seems in people's eyes. Is there no reality in the penance thus sealed and witnessed by the good works, and wherefore should it not bring you peace? No, Esther, no, replied the clergyman. There is no substance in it. It is cold and dead, and can do nothing for me. Of penance I have had enough. Of penitence there has been none. Else I should have long ago have thrown off these garments of mock holiness, and have shown myself to mankind as they will see me at the judgment seat. Happy are you, Esther, that wear the scarlet letter openly on your bosom. Mine burns in secret. Thou little knowest what a relief it is, after the torment of a 7 years' cheat, to look into an eye that recognizes me for what I am. Had I one friend, or were it my worst enemy, to whom, when sickened with the praises of all other men, I could daily betake myself and be known as the vilest of all sinners, methinks my soul might keep itself alive thereby. Even thus much of truth would save me. But now it is all falsehood, all emptiness, all death. Esther Prynne looked into his face, but hesitated to speak, yet uttering his long restrained emotions so vehemently as he did. His words here offered her the very point of circumstances in which to interpose what she came to say. She conquered her fears and spoke. Such a friend as thou hast even now wished for, said she, with whom to weep over thy sin. Thou hast in me the partner of it. Again she hesitated, but brought out the words with an effort. Thou hast long had such an enemy, and dwellest with him under the same roof. The minister started to his feet, gasping for breath and clutching at his heart as if he would have torn it out of his bosom. What sayest thou, cried he, an enemy, and under mine own roof? What mean you? Esther Prynne was now fully sensible of the deep injury for which she was responsible to this unhappy man in permitting him to lie for so many years, or indeed for a single moment, at the mercy of one whose purposes could not be other than malevolent. The very contiguity of his enemy beneath whatever mask the latter might conceal himself was enough to disturb the magnetic sphere of a being so sensitive as Arthur Dimmesdale. There had been a period when Esther was less alive to this consideration, or perhaps in the misanthropy of her own trouble she left the minister to bear what she might picture to herself as a more tolerable doom. But of late, since the night of his vigil, all her sympathies towards him had been both softened and invigorated. She now read his heart more accurately. She doubted not that the continual presence of Roger Chillingworth, the secret poison of his malignity infecting all the air about him, and his authorized interference as a physician with the minister's physical and spiritual infirmities, that these bad opportunities had been turned to a cruel purpose. By means of them, the sufferer's conscience had been kept in an irritated state, the tendency of which was not to cure by wholesome pain, but to disorganize paralyze and corrupt his spiritual being. Its result on earth could hardly fail to be insanity, and hereafter that eternal alienation from the good and true, of which madness is perhaps the earthly type. Such was the ruin to which she had brought the man once, nay, why should we not speak of it, still so passionately loved? Hester felt that the sacrifice of the clergyman's good nature and death itself, as she had already told Roger Chillingworth, would have been infinitely preferable to the alternative which she had taken upon herself to choose, and now, rather than have had this grievous wrong to confess, she would gladly have lain down on the forest leaves and died there at Arthur Dimmesdale's feet. "Oh, Arthur," she cried, "forgive me. In all things else I have striven to be true. Truth was the one virtue which I might have held fast, and did hold fast through all extremity, save when thy good, thy life, thy fame were put in question. Then I consented to a deception, but a lie is never good, even though death threaten on the other side. Dost thou not see what I would say? That old man, the physician, whom they call Roger Chillingworth, he was my husband." The minister looked at her for an instant with all that violence of passion which, intermixed in more shapes than one with his higher, purer, softer qualities, was in fact the portion of him which the devil claimed, and through which he sought to win the rest. Never was there a blacker or fiercer frown than Hester now encountered. For the brief space that it lasted, it was a dark transfiguration by this character, but his character had been so much enfeebled by suffering that even its lower energies were incapable of more than a temporary struggle. He sank down on the ground and buried his face in his hands. "I might have known it," murmured he. "I did know it. Was not the secret told me in the natural recoil of my heart at the first sight of him, and as often as I have seen him since? Why did I not understand? Oh, Mr. Prynne, thou little knowest all the horror of this thing, and the shame, the indelicacy, the horrible ugliness of this exposure of a sick and guilty heart to the very eye that would gloat over it. Woman, thou art accountable for this. I cannot forgive thee." "Thou shalt forgive me," cried Hester, flinging herself on the fallen leaves beside him. "Let God punish, thou shalt forgive." With sudden and desperate tenderness she threw her arms around him and pressed his head against her bosom, little caring, though his cheek rested on the Scarlet Letter, he would have released himself, but strove in vain to do so. Hester would not set him free, lest he should look her sternly in the face. All the world had frowned on her for 7 long years, had it frowned upon this lonely woman, and still she bore it all, nor even once turned away her firm, sad eyes. Heaven likewise had frowned upon her, and she had not died, but the frown of this pale, weak, sinful, and sorrow-stricken man was what Hester could not bear and live. Wilt thou yet forgive me?" she repeated over and over again. "Wilt thou not frown? Wilt thou forgive?" "I do forgive you, Hester," replied the minister at length with a deep utterance out of an abyss of sadness. "But no anger. I freely forgive you. May God forgive us both. We are not, Hester, the worst sinners in the world. There is one worse than even the polluted priest. That old man's revenge had been blacker than my sin. He had violated in cold blood the sanctity of a human heart. Thou and I, Hester, never did so. Never, never," whispered she. What we did had a consecration of its own. We felt it so. We said so to each other. Hast thou forgotten it?" "Hush, Hester," said Arthur Dimmesdale, rising from the ground. "No, I have not forgotten." They sat down again side by side, and hand clasped in hand on the mossy trunk of the fallen tree. Life had never brought them a gloomier hour. It was the point whither their pathway had so long been tending, and darkening ever as it stole along, and yet it enclosed a charm that made them linger upon it and claim another, and after all, another moment. The forest was obscure around them and creaked with the blast that was passing through it. The boughs were tossing heavily above their heads, while one solemn tree groaned dolefully to another, as if telling the sad story of the pair that sat beneath, or constrained to forebode evil to come. And yet they lingered. How dreary looked the forest track that led backward to the settlement, where Hester Prynne must take up again the burden of her ignominy, and the minister the hollow mockery of his good name. So they lingered an instant longer. No golden light had ever been so precious as the gloom of this dark forest. Here, seen only by his eyes, the Scarlet Letter need not burn into the bosom of the fallen woman. Here, seen only by her eyes, Arthur Dimmesdale, false to God and man, might be for one moment true. Hester, he started at the thought that suddenly occurred to him. Hester, cried he, here is a new horror. Roger Chillingworth knows your purpose to reveal his true character. Will he continue then to keep our secret? What will now be the course of this revenge? There is a strange secrecy in his nature, replied Hester thoughtfully, and it has grown upon him by the hidden practices of his revenge. I deem it not likely that he will betray the secret. He will doubtless seek other means of satiating his dark passion. And I, how am I to live longer, breathing the same air with this deadly enemy? Exclaimed Arthur Dimmesdale, shrinking within himself, and pressing his hand nervously against his heart, a gesture that had grown involuntary with him. Think for me, Hester, thou art strong, resolve for me. Thou must dwell no longer with this man, said Hester slowly and firmly. Thy heart must be no longer under his evil eye. It were far worse than death, replied the minister, but how to avoid it? What choice remains to me? Shall I lie down again on these withered leaves where I cast myself when thou didst tell me what he was? Must I sink down there and die at once? Alas, what a ruin has befallen thee, said Hester, with the tears gushing into her eyes. Wilt thou die for very weakness? There is no other cause. The judgment of God is on me, answered the conscience-stricken priest. It is too mighty for me to struggle with. Heaven would show mercy, rejoined Hester. Hast thou but the strength to take advantage of it? Be thou strong for me, answered he. Advise me what to do. Is the world then so narrow? Exclaimed Hester Prynne, fixing her deep eyes on the minister's, and instinctively exercising a magnetic power over a spirit so shattered and subdued that it could hardly hold itself erect. Doth the universe lie within the compass of yonder town, which only a little time ago was but a leaf-strewn desert, as lonely as this around us? Whither leads yonder forest track? Backward to the settlement, thou sayest? Yes, but onward too. Deeper it goes, deeper into the wilderness, less plainly to be seen at every step, until some few miles hence the yellow leaves will show no vestige of the white man's bread. There thou art free. So brief a journey would bring thee from a world where thou hast been most wretched to one where thou mayest still be happy. Is there not shade enough in all this boundless forest to hide thy heart from the gaze of Roger Chillingworth? Yes, Hester, but only under the fallen leaves, replied the minister with a sad smile. Then there is the broad pathway of the sea, continued Hester. It brought thee hither. If thou so choose, it will bear thee back again. In our native land, whether in some remote rural village or in vast London, or surely in Germany, in France, or pleasant Italy, thou wouldst be beyond this power and knowledge. And what hast thou to do with all these iron men and their opinions? They have kept thy better part in bondage too long already. It cannot be, answered the minister, listening as if he were called upon to realize a dream. I am powerless to go. Wretched and simple as I am, I have had no other thought than to drag on my earthly existence in the sphere where Providence had placed me. Lost as my own soul is, I would still do what I may for other human souls. I dare not quit my post, though an unfaithful sentinel, whose sure reward is death and dishonor, when his dreary watch shall come to an end. Thou art crushed under this 7 years' weight of misery, replied Hester, fervently resolved to buoy him up with her own energy. But thou shalt leave it all behind thee. It shall not cumber thy steps as thou treadest along the forest path. Neither shalt thou freight the ship with it, if thou prefer to cross the sea. Leave this wreck and ruin where it hath happened. Meddle no more with it. Begin all anew. Hast thou exhausted possibility in the failure of this one trial? Not so. The future is yet full of trial and success. There is happiness to be enjoyed. There is good to be done. Exchange this false life of thine for a true one. If thy spirit summon thee to such a mission, the teacher and apostle of the red men, or, as is more thy nature, be a scholar and a sage among the wisest and most renowned of the cultivated world, preach, write, act, do anything save to lie down and die. Give up this name of Arthur Dimmesdale and make thyself another, and a high one, such as thou canst wear without fear or shame. Why shouldest thou tarry so much as one other day in the torments that have so gnawed into thy life, that have made thee feeble to will and to do, that will leave thee powerless even to repent? Up and away. O Esther, cried Arthur Dimmesdale, in whose eyes a fitful light, kindled by her enthusiasm, flashed up and died away. Thou tellest of running a race to a man whose knees are tottering beneath him. I must die here. There is not strength or courage left me to venture into the wide, strange, difficult world alone. It was the last expression of the despondency of a broken spirit. He lacked the energy to grasp the better fortune that seemed within his reach. He repeated the word, alone, Esther. Thou shalt not go alone, answered she in a deep whisper. Then all was spoken. Chapter 18, A Flood of Sunshine. Arthur Dimmesdale gazed into Esther's face with a look in which hope and joy shone out, indeed, but with fear betwixt them and a kind of horror at their boldness, who had spoken what he vaguely hinted, as but not dared to speak. But Esther Prynne, with a mind of native courage and activity, and for so long a period not merely estranged, but outlawed from society, had habituated herself to such a latitude of speculation as was altogether foreign to the clergyman. She had wandered without rule or guidance in a moral wilderness as vast and as intricate and shadowy as the untamed forest, amid the gloom of which they were now holding a colloquy that was to decide their fate. Her intellect and heart had their home, as it were, in desert places where she roamed as freely as the wild natives in the woods. For years past, she looked from his estranged point of view at human institutions and whatever priests or legislators had established, criticizing all with hardly more reverence than the native would feel for this clerical band, the judicial robe, the pillory, the gallows, the fireside, or the church. The tendency of her fate and fortunes had been to set her free. The Scarlet Letter was her passport into regions where other women dared not tread. Shame, despair, solitude, these had been her teachers. Stern and wild ones, they had made her strong, but taught her much amiss. The minister, on the other hand, had never gone through an experience calculated to lead him beyond the scope of generally received laws, although in a single instant he had so fearfully transgressed one of the most sacred of them. But this had been a sin of passion, not of principle. prejudices. As a priest, the framework of his order inevitably hemmed him in as a man who had once sinned but who kept his conscience all alive and painfully sensitive by the fretting of an unhealed wound. He might have been supposed safer within the line of virtue than if he had never sinned at all. Thus, we seem to see that, as regarded Esther Prynne, the whole 7 years of outlaw and ignominy had been little other than a preparation for this very hour. But Arthur Timsdale, were such a man once more to fall, what plea could be urged in extenuation of his crime? None, unless it avail him somewhat that he was broken down by long and exquisite suffering, that his mind was darkened and confused by the very remorse which heralded that between fleeing and as an avowed criminal and remaining as a hypocrite, conscience might find it hard to strike the balance, that it was human to avoid the peril of death and infamy and the inscrutable machinations of an enemy, that finally to this poor pilgrim on his dreary and deserted path, faint, sick, miserable, and appeared a glimpse of human affection and sympathy, a new life and a true one in exchange for the heavy doom which he was now expiating. And be the stern and sad truth spoken, that the breach which guilt has once made into the human soul is never in its mortal state repaired. It may be watched and guarded so that the enemy shall not forgive his way again into the citadel, and might even in his subsequent assaults select some other avenue in preference to that where he had formerly succeeded. But there is still the ruined wall, and near it the stealthy tread of the foe that would win over again his unforgotten triumph. The struggle, if it were one, need not be described. Let it suffice that the clergyman resolved to flee, and not alone. If in all these past 7 years, thought he, I could recall one instance of peace or hope, I would yet endure for the sake of that earnest of heaven's mercy. But now, since I am irrevocably doomed, wherefore should I not snatch the solace allowed to the condemned culprit before his execution? Or if this be the path to a better life, as Hester would persuade me, I surely give up no fairer prospect by pursuing it. Neither can I any longer live without her companionship. So powerful is she to sustain, so tender to soothe. O thou to whom I dare not lift with mine eyes, wilt thou yet pardon me? Thou wilt go, said Esther calmly as he met her glance. The discussion once made a glow of strange enjoyment that threw its flickering brightness over the trouble of his breast. It was the exhilarating effect upon a prisoner just escaped from the dungeon of his own heart, or breathing the wild free atmosphere of an unredeemed, unchristianized, lawless region. His spirit rose as if it were with a bound and attained a nearer prospect of the sky than throughout all of the misery which had kept him groveling on the earth. Of a deeply religious temperament, there was inevitably a tinge of the devotional in his mood. Do I feel joy again? Cried he, wondering at himself. Methought the charm of it was dead in me. O Esther, thou art my better angel. I seem to have flung myself, sick, sin-stained, and sorrow-blackened, down upon these forest leaves, and to have risen up all made anew, and with new powers to glorify him that hath been merciful. This is already the better life. Why did we not find it sooner? Let us not look back, answered Esther Prynne. The past is gone. Wherefore should we linger upon it now? See, with this symbol I undo it all, and make it as it had never been. So speaking, she undid the clasp that fastened the Scarlet Letter, and taking it from her bosom, threw it to a distance among the withered leaves. The mystic token alighted on the hither verge of the her spirit. Oh, exquisite relief. She had not known the weight until she felt the freedom. By another impulse, she took off the formal cap that confined her hair, and down it fell upon her shoulders, dark and rich, with at once a shadow and a light in its abundance, and imparting the charm of softness to her features. There played around her mouth and beamed out of her eyes a radiant and tender smile that seemed gushing from the very heart of womanhood. A crimson flush was growing on her cheek that had been so long so pale. Her sex, her youth, the whole richness of her beauty came back from what men call the irrevocable past, and clustered themselves with her maiden hope and happiness before unknown within the magic circle of this hour. And as if the gloom of the earth and sky had been but the influence of these two mortal hearts, it vanished with their sorrow. All at once, as with the sudden smile of heaven forth burst the sunshine, pouring a fairy flood into the obscure forest, gladdening each green leaf, transmuting the yellow fallen ones to gold, and gleaming adown the gray trunks of the solemn trees. The objects that had made a shadow hitherto embodied the brightness now. The course of the little brook might be traced by its merry gleam afar into the wood's heart of mystery, which had become a mystery of joy. Such was the sympathy of nature, that wild heaven nature of the forest, never subjugated by human law, nor illuminated by higher truth, with the bliss of these two spirits. Love, whether newly born or roused from a death-like slumber, must always create a sunshine, filling the heart so full of radiance that it overflows upon the outward world. Had the forest still kept its gloom, it would have been bright in Hester's eyes, and bright in Arthur Dimmesdale's. Hester looked at him with the thrill of another joy. "Thou must know Pearl," said she, "our little Pearl. Thou hast seen her." "Yes, I know it, but thou wilt see her now with other eyes. She is a strange child. I hardly comprehend her, but thou wilt love her dearly as I do, and wilt advise me how to deal with her. Dost thou think the child will be glad to know me?" asked the minister somewhat uneasily. "I have long shrunk from children because they often show a distrust, a backwardness to the familiar with me. I have even been afraid of little Pearl." "Oh, that was sad," answered the mother, "but she will love thee dearly, and thou her. She is not far off. I will call her. Pearl, Pearl." "I see the child," observed the minister. "Yonder she is, standing in a streak of sunshine, a good way off on the other side of the brook. So thou thinkest the child will love me?" Hester smiled and again called to Pearl, who was visible at some distance as the minister had described her, like a bright, apparelled vision in a sunbeam which fell down upon her through an arch of boughs. The ray quivered to and fro, making her figure dim or distinct, now like a real child, now like a child's spirit. As the splendor went and came again, she heard her mother's voice and approached slowly through the forest. Pearl had not found the hour pass wearisomely while her mother sat talking with the clergyman. The great black forest, stern as it showed itself to those who brought the guilt and troubles of the world into its bosom, became the playmate of the lonely infant as well as it knew how. Somber as it was, it put on the kindness of its moods to welcome her. It offered her the partridge berries, the growth of the preceding autumn, but ripening only in the spring, and now red as drops of blood upon the withered leaves. These Pearl gathered, and was pleased with their wild flavor. The small denizens of the wilderness hardly took pains to move out of her path. A partridge, indeed, with a brood of 10 behind her, ran forward threateningly, but soon repented of her fierceness and clucked to her young ones not to be afraid. A pigeon alone on a low branch allowed Pearl to come beneath, and uttered a sound as much of greeting as alarm. A squirrel from the lofty depths of his domestic tree chattered either in anger or merriment, for a squirrel is such a choleric and humorous little personage, and that it had to distinguish between his moods. So he chattered at the child and flung down a nut upon her head. It was a last year's nut, and already gnawed by its sharp tooth. A fox, startled from his course appeared to know it, and one and another whispered as she passed, "Adorn thyself with me, thou beautiful child, adorn thyself with me." And to please them, Pearl gathered the violets and anemones and columbines and some twigs of the freshest green, which the old trees held down before her eyes. With these she decorated her hair and her young waist and became a nymph child, or an infant dryad, or whatever else was in closest sympathy with the antique wood. In such guise had Pearl adorned herself when she heard her mother's voice and came slowly back, slowly, for she saw